Hi and welcome back to Paramedic Project. Thanks for joining us once again. Today, I have an episode on paramedic wellbeing. So let's get right to it. So at the end of the presentation, let's set some goals. First, we're going to try and accept some things. Second, we're going to try and shift our thinking. And third, we're going to strategize, learn to strategize about our wellbeing. So before we go any further, we need to ask who I am. You need to know who I am. I'm a paramedic. I'm not a mental health professional. And this presentation is based on some books and some research that I've read, as well as plenty of conversations with mental health professionals and social workers. Of course, all with a strong pre-hospital filter applied. All of the concepts presented are my own. And of course, if we're talking about paramedic health and well-being, we need to have a content warning. Some of it is about mental health, and sometimes that can be confronting. So if you're feeling a little bit troubled during the presentation or after, please access some of your paramedic support network. So what exactly is good mental health? If we're talking about well-being, we need a definition of good mental health. And one of the shared absolutes in all the literature is the definition of good mental health. It's not just the absence of poor mental health, it's really a holistic concept, and it lies somewhere between our physical health, our emotional well-being, our mental health, our social well-being and interactions, and our spiritual well-being as well. So it's multifactorial, it's interconnected, and all of the elements affect one another. So we no longer consider one element in isolation. So it makes sense that if all of the elements are interconnected, we should really stop referring to good mental health altogether. And maybe we should just start talking about good health. And it makes a lot of sense when we actually start breaking down the different elements of good health. If we're talking about our physical health, if you've got chronic pain, for example, of course that affects your mental health, and of course it makes you feel a certain way, so it affects your emotional well-being as well. If you've got anxiety, that makes you feel a certain way, and it probably makes you socially isolated somehow. It's difficult for you if you've got anxiety to get out and be social. And if you're socially isolated, it makes you feel lonely. So there's some really, really basic examples. But probably the missing piece of the puzzle for many people and for many paramedics as well is the spiritual well-being. And for me, this could be some sort of spiritual practice. It might be a meditation or mindfulness practice. It might be a yoga practice. But it might also just be doing some things like spending time in nature, hiking, sailing, or going for a surf, or some type of artistic pursuit. But it's always something that is personally very significant to you. And really, when I think about a spiritual practice, it's about doing something where you might feel a connection to something bigger than you. It doesn't have to be religious. It's just a connection. A connection to something bigger than you where you can get some greater perspective on life. I suppose all of this defining of good health really, it makes me think of the question, what does it actually look like to be a healthy paramedic? And it's probably something that we don't understand very well, and it's probably something we don't ask ourselves too often either. Before we go on to the next slide, we need to understand that in any presentation about paramedic health, there's always going to be a shitty slide. It's the slide where we talk about the bad stuff that happens to us because we're paramedics. It talks about the chronically elevated cortisol levels. It talks about the predisposition to chronic disease. So before we go on to the next slide, let's just get our defenses up a little bit. We're looking at the negatives here. All right, let's go. And the things in red there on that shitty slide, they're the things we really want to focus on. We don't need to read the whole thing, but the things in red are the really important things. And on a personal safety note, basically they look like this. Female paramedics have much higher rates of depression than their male paramedic counterparts. and than other people in the community. Male paramedics have much higher rates of suicide. So let's really make a big effort to keep ourselves and each other safe. This quote, "Everything starts with acceptance," is something that's really widespread in Buddhism. And it's something I've heard from my meditation teacher on a number of occasions. We really need to accept those negative consequences. But of course, this is a really challenging paradigm because professionally we are invested as paramedics in a model of best practice patient care that's informed by biomedical research. We know that good quality CPR and early defibrillation saves lives in the setting of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. And most of what we do professionally, or a lot of what we do professionally, and a lot of what we consider a job of a paramedic is to improve clinical outcomes for patients, and those clinical outcomes are really anchored in that biomedical research. It's a challenging paradigm because the same body of research says that we as paramedics will undoubtedly be affected by the professional environment that we work in. And, in the research that I've read, this is an absolute. Everybody will get affected. If you're a paramedic, an emergency service worker, a soldier, there's no escaping this. There are no superhuman paramedics out there that don't get affected by their professional environment. Everybody does. It's an absolute in the research. It's backed up by the biomedical model. And we need to remember this is not a normal job. It's not a normal thing to be a paramedic. And I mean, really, when you think about it, it makes sense. Caring for sick and injured people at all hours of the day and night might not be that healthy. So it might not be the greatest thing for our own health. And before we can really make inroads in this paramedic wellness space, we need to accept that. Everything starts with acceptance, and we need to accept that there are negative consequences of our work. This picture here is a still from a scene in The Hurt Locker. It's one of my favourite movies, and I love this scene. And I find it really interesting because most people, when they see this scene, they think about a returned soldier who is burnt out, struggling with their return to civilization. But I actually identify quite strongly with this scene, and I often have a similar experience when I'm on my way home from work and I have to stop in and do some grocery shopping. And I'll be in a cereal aisle or in an aisle of a supermarket, and I'll be looking around thinking, why are there so many cereals? It's strange that I've just been to a cardiac arrest or a family or someone in crisis and I'm here trying to choose a cereal. And I just think, surely it can't get any better than Nutri-Grain. We don't need that many cereals, come on. But deep down and a bit more seriously about this, it's really for me about values. For me personally, I think being a paramedic means that, my values are really close to my skin. When I'm seeing those people in crisis, it reminds me of what's really important to me. The values, they're not buried deep down. And I think because I'm a paramedic, I try and live a life where I'm expressing those values, where those values come out. And, this is really challenging. It's challenging for me to keep trying to do that. It's challenging for my loved ones, for my family and friends, for the people who are close to me. Because I'm always pushing people's buttons around what's really important to them. But it is who I've become because of my professional environment. And I don't see that as a negative. It's a way that I've been rewired because of being a paramedic, but I think that's a positive. And in this way, I think we need to stop thinking about the negatives of the job and start really thinking about those positives. And this is what I mean by making a shift. We need to shift our thinking. Let's celebrate the perspectives, the talents, the skills, and the diversity that being a paramedic brings to our communities, to the communities that we work in, but also to the communities that we live in as well. So of course, that rewiring process has some negative side effects, but let's think about the positives. It means that we can function in stressful environments where other people in the community can't. And so I really think that we all have our very own paramedic superpowers. So let's try and celebrate them. The superpowers, are the ways we have adapted, things that we've learnt that make us great paramedics, that we carry with us in our daily lives, that we take into the communities that we live in. So let's shift our thinking and let's start celebrating those talents and that diversity that those talents brings to our communities. And I think we need to strategize and rewire. We know that rewiring process naturally happens when we're exposed to our professional environment to a stressful situation. But if we're talking about a space of good health, good paramedic health and paramedic wellbeing, we need to start thinking holistically about our own health in the context of our professional environment. So let's try and address all of the pieces of the health puzzle. And Michelle Obama is someone who's really passionate about this. She talks about putting ourselves and our own self-care on the to-do list. And it's something that most people in the community have trouble with, but I think it's something that is incredibly important if you're a paramedic. And this picture here is a fantastic example of that. It's being outside, it's being physically active, it's being socially engaged and doing something you're passionate about. It ticks so many of those boxes of that holistic health pie in one activity. And I think we need to seek out and do more activities that tick those multifactorial pieces really well. And I really find it a little incongruous that we personally, as paramedics, spend so much time thinking about other people and thinking about caring for other people and how to do that best, and we put so much time and effort into that, but we don't really do the same for ourselves. So we need to start asking ourselves professionally, we need to start asking ourselves the question, what is it to be a good paramedic? And I don't think we can really go on without acknowledging that being a good paramedic, a big part of that is having a very robust self-care strategy and plan that you implement in your weekly and daily routine. You can't be a good paramedic unless you're doing that. It's no longer just about clinical outcomes. You've got to care for yourself as well. So if we're talking about a strategy, let's be a little bit more specific. And in our professional environment, and thinking about their professional environment, sometimes we need a circuit breaker. So if we find ourselves entering into that negative downward spiral of thoughts and emotions because of a stressful situation, it might be a challenging case you've just attended, might be on the way to a challenging case or a case you don't want to do. It might be an example of a stressful situation. It might be the middle of the night, you might be exhausted and you might have some personal stuff going on at home, but you still need to go and treat a patient. It might be just balancing that tension that exists between best quality patient care for the patient you're dealing with and the operational KPIs of the ambulance service or your employer. And that brings a lot of tension and that makes things stressful. Or it can be all of those things coming at you at once. It can be 3 a.m, you're exhausted, you're balancing clinical and operational demands, you've got stuff going on at home, and you're trying to deal with all of them at all the same time. So if we're in that situation, we need a circuit breaker. And I think this label, laugh, and learn strategy is really, really easy to remember, and it's really easy to implement as well. So if you're in a negative downward spiral, first of all, label your emotions. Say, I feel exhausted and frustrated, or label how you feel. Then try and have a laugh about the situation. I think this is something that we do really well as paramedics. We've got that dark paramedic sense of humour. Even with a healthy dose of sarcasm, we can always find light in a situation and have a laugh about it. So label your emotions, have a laugh about the situation, and then try and take some learning away from it. So say to yourself, if I could do that over again, this is how I'd change it. Say to yourself, if I get that case again in the next hour, this is how I'm going to do it differently. This is how I'm going to differently approach it. And it's really this concept of incremental gains, doing 100 things 1% better. I think if we can just tick some of those boxes daily or job after job after job, sort of do this circuit breaking, rewiring type process, we're just going to become better paramedics. It's all about incremental gains. Second on the list is exercise. Bang for buck, greatest good for the greatest number of paramedics. Exercise will put your body and your neurology in the right place to rewire in a positive way. Yes, our brains rewire to help us cope with stressful situations, but they can also rewire back the other way in a healthy format. And exercise is the thing that does more good for more paramedics than anything else. So we just need to be healthier paramedics. We need to get out there and exercise. Third thing there is up and down regulate. So we need to learn to upregulate and downregulate our nervous systems. And I think for a lot of us, this is a bit of a learnt skill. Upregulating, the easiest way that I think to do that is just to try and learn something new. And this is why professional development is so important. But, it might not be learning something about being a paramedic. It might not be professional learnings. It might be that you're happy with where you're at as a paramedic and you're more passionate about something outside of the work. That's okay. So just try and learn something new. Learn an instrument, a new language. Learn some artistic pursuit. Take up a new sport, but learn something new. It's really about upregulating your nervous system. And this is why this concept of lifelong learning is so important. Then downregulating your nervous system, I think that's about doing something that softens your heart, spending time with family, connecting with others, maybe some type of artistic pursuit or spiritual practice. And you can see here when we're talking about these examples, and if we reflect back to that holistic, multifactorial, interconnected model of health, you can do one thing that ticks so many of the boxes all at once, that upregulates and downregulates your nervous system at the same time, that allows you to do some exercise as well. So, if we start doing these things that are really rich, healthy experiences, it ticks a lot of those holistic health boxes. So at the start of the presentation, we talked about 3 goals. Accepting some things, shifting our thinking, and strategizing. So let's accept that the professional environment we choose to work in has negative consequences and that no one can escape them. We need to accept that if we're going to move on and actually address paramedic wellness. Let's shift our thinking away from those negatives. Let's stop thinking so much about the negatives and start celebrating the talents, the perspectives that being a paramedic brings, the diversity that brings the community that we live in. Let's shift our thinking away from the negatives and start looking at the positives of being a paramedic. And then finally, with those 2 things in mind, let's put in place a robust self-care strategy. Let's strategize to rewire and get more healthy as paramedics. Let's ask ourselves, what is it to be a good paramedic, and include a self-care practice in that question. So label laugh and learn as a great circuit breaker. Get out and do some exercise, and then learn to upregulate and downregulate our nervous systems by learning something new and connecting with someone else or softening our heart. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been Paramedic Project. It's something that I'm really passionate about, so I'm really pleased that you've listened to the presentation and I've been able to share with you. It's been Paramedic Project. Find us on social media. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.